Welcome to Transformation Heroes by Feedia, a series dedicated to CX professionals. Hello and welcome to another episode of Transformation Heroes, joined once again by François. I'm your host, Carlos. Hello, François.
Hello, Carlos. Good to be back.
Good to see you again. I thought I'd try and switch it up and do it the other way around.
Next time.
Great. So today we're going to be talking about how to create a robust CX action plan, specifically for 2025. And we're going to focus on 5 tips. Let's jump right into it with tip number 1. Tip number 1 is all about defining the scope of your action plans. So when we talk about action plans, what we're trying to do is understand what CX professionals would find the most effective. And so what better way to start off than to define what's the most important scope, specifically how far we can go in terms of the granularity. So my first question to you, François, is how should CX professionals decide between creating a single action plan for an entire department or making individual ones for each specific team?
Yeah, so a couple of things, Carlos. I think first one, it's very important to remember that the action plan is kind of like the end of the process. So when you're able to listen to your customers, you can centralize that information, then you can enrich it, you can connect it to your CRM data, to your data lake, and so on. Then you can use natural language processing to figure out, hey, what's broken, where should I focus, and what are the key improvements which I've detected in my customer journeys. And the action plan is at the very end. I mean, there is a report at the end, but you need to take all of that information and all of that process to turn this into something that is actionable. And, like if you Google customer experience, one of the key challenge, which has been a challenge for a long time, is the actionability. Yes, I can measure my NPS. Yes, I can reply to my reviews. Like I can handle, my customer experience data, but how do I turn it into a meaningful actions? And that's where the action plans, I think, are our key elements of the customer experience job. And again, might not be the customer experience job title, but again, you're working in quality, in products, like you have to go into an action plan at some point when it comes to customer experience.
Yeah. So when it comes to that, are we able to maybe define what's granular for an action plan? Obviously, you have the CX department is usually managing a wide scope. They're talking to C-suite. They're also talking to operational teams. They're tying everything together. So in terms of having a robust action plan, how would we define what's useful?
Yeah. So you will have different kind of action plans, and I think there is one that is very known to everyone, which is, I'm going to report to my boss and to my boss's boss, like what they need to do based on the, voice of the customer. And it used to be a very manual process because without AI, you have to read all the verbatims, you have to read and there is 2 ways to see it. Like either you figure out the improvements by yourself based on the NPS score, based on the CSAT, and you say like, well, I think we should do this. Now, there is another way, which is you analyze what your customers are saying with their voice. So basically, when it's not just NPS score, but it's what would you like to see in our product? What are improvements that you would do? Like basically asking very open-ended questions that will give you a lot of text. And the goal is to turn this text into meaningful action, into business, into your organization, so you can transform it faster. And what's interesting is that if you start listening to your customers and include what they're saying into the action plans, well, you'll find a lot of smart ideas because your customers, if you put customers first, they're very interested into getting better product, better services, and they are the one which at the end of the day pays the bills. You need your customers. So it's very, very, very important that they can influence your action plans. If we, have a look at the 2 action plans, the one that you figure out yourself the improvements and the one which are driven by what your customers are saying. You don't want to go 100% one way or 100% the other way, but you probably want to be more like 90% what your customers are saying, because you'll get a lot there. Again, if you ask the right questions, of course. And then in terms of granularity, you want to be as precise as possible. And again, absolutely impossible to do without AI, or it would take massive efforts. If you were to build an action plan per product and you have like 120 products, that takes quite a lot of time, right? So it's not it's not so easy. But thanks to the technology that we have today, you can do this. Yeah, and you can do this in a pretty accurate way. So in terms of granularity, the more granular you are, the more actionable the action plan will be. And yes, of course, you need to report at the end to the executive team, but they're not necessarily the ones which are going to turn that into action. They are the ones that are going to focus, that are going to give you the resources that you need. But that's why again, like the more granular you are, the better it is for everyone.
Okay, great. I think that really answers my point. And so when we think of an action plan, we often have triggers. So what's really important is identifying, and this is moving on to tip number 2, identifying when and how to act. And so the triggers are there in place in order to define a certain number of rules of what information should enter the action plan, or what sort of information should go out and be sent to users. And so with that in mind, what would you say constitutes a typical trigger? Are there specific ones that you find effective?
Yes. So when it comes to customer experience, what's interesting is you have clear KPIs, which are, again, like if we just focus on the NPS, Net Promoter Score, you can correlate NPS with topics which are going to be identified in your customer feedback. And again, whether it comes from social networks, e-reputation, surveys, or ticketing, doesn't matter. These are valid customer feedback where people are spending time to giving you what they think about your business.
Yeah.
And so what you want at the end of the day is identify at a specific time what's wrong. And the way you do it is you make sure that you filter all of this information based on time and that you can correlate it with the KPIs. So for example, a Net Promoter Score, and then you can go one level down with the topics. So for example, if you are a retailer and you know that you have an issue with because you have just too many people in the shop and they're just too small, then you know that for the next shop or when it comes to the business impact, you can calculate it very easily, but you need to have the timing element. So you need to know when it happens. Is it something that happens every single weekend, or is it something that happens, once a year? So the timing element is very important. And then you want to make sure that there is something that's going to trigger it. So the KPI, so it could be, for example, NPS below 40, below 20, below 30, based on your average. And then making sure that you can go one level deeper based on the either a key topic or either some business element.
It sounds like using triggers to align with customer journey is something that's really important.
Yeah, it's something that you have to automate at some point, because otherwise, if you have multiple customer journeys, it can be very hard. Again, you're doing with multiple, you're dealing with multiple departments. So you want to make sure that on the different customer journeys, you have specific triggers where you know that something is wrong, and that when these triggers are, they're on, you have an action plan, or you have ways to create action plans that you can then dispatch internally. So there is the whole process, which is not that straightforward of you need to listen, you need to make sure that you have all the context, you need to detect what's wrong, and then you need to trigger when it's wrong, what you can do to improve.
Yeah. And how does that tie in with the idea of having a feedback loop? So, having your action plan, you hopefully make changes to your action plan. How does that tie into kind of continue on that constant feedback?
Yeah. So again, what's very interesting with the action plan is that they're always based on time. So an action plan today is not going to be valid in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months. Of course, it depends always on your internal feedback loop. How long does it take between we figure out something is wrong and it's actually applied on the ground? But if it's a matter of months, then in 6 months, your action plan just doesn't make any sense. And that's why having a way to automate this process, to validate and to be yeah, that's a good idea, that's a bad idea, no, this is very expensive, we won't be able to do this. So for example, if we go back to the retailer example, if the action plan is yeah, you need to have a store that is at least X larger, well, it's not so easy to apply on the ground. Whereas some of the signs are incorrect in the shop, this is pretty straightforward to fix, and the impact can be pretty huge. So you want to make sure that you always have time in mind, and therefore it doesn't take a lot of time to rebuild this action plan. So you can always have the last updates, the latest news, right? So you can act on the ground as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and that feeds in really nicely to our third tip, which is about prioritizing actions. So specifically KPIs and customer segmentation. How do you feel CX teams are able to effectively incorporate KPIs and customer segmentation into action plans?
Yeah, so it goes to the KPI segmentation. So you don't want to trigger action plan every week for every team when things are working well. So you want to make sure that you can have the trigger. That was tip number 2, like making sure that you identify very precisely triggers that will, at the end, will trigger an action plan. This action plan needs to be dispatched to the right team, and it needs to have all the information. In most of the time, like you're going to find this information in your CRM system, for example, in your marketing system, in your operational system, like you're going to find contextual information. Could be the customer type, could be the product type, could be, if it's about an app, it could be the device they're using. Like all of this context is absolutely key to have an action plan that is effective. Because if you just have, we have an issue on the app, like it's broken, but you don't know what is the device, you don't know what is the page, like all of this is contextual information that is very important. And that's why this segmentation is absolutely key to have an action plan that is efficient and that you can actually turn into action. It's not just, hey, we've generated an action plan, our work is done. We just simply won't get it.
Yeah, and I mean, choosing the right KPIs as well to measure is also very important. So because this is later on in the process, the idea is hopefully you have an indication of what type of KPIs are valuable to your company to measure. And so that also is incorporated into the action process. Okay, so imagine I have my action plan set up. However, I have a fair amount of KPIs. I have a fair amount of segmentation. I have a fair amount of triggers happening at the same time. I'm a little bit worried about data paralysis. Seeing too many metrics and kind of feeling really overwhelmed. Do you have any tips of how to overcome that for a CX professional?
Yeah, you want to prioritize a lot. And that's something that is very challenging, at least for us, but it's something that some companies are actually very, very good at this. Like you want to find a way to correlate it with financial impact at some point, like that will make the action plan go a lot faster. And then so there is that idea of like, what's the impact of any action plan that I'm building? Not just, hey, it's going to solve the customer problem, but okay, we know the customers that are affected, so therefore we can know the revenue that is affected. Now we can prioritize, okay? Yep. And then there is the financial impact, but there's also another impact which is very important, which is like, easy is it, right? Because again, like if you need to buy a new to get a new location for your shop, it's a little bit harder than just like putting a couple of signs or making sure that you have some training for the staff friendliness, right? These are very, very different actions, and so you need in your action plan to have the financial impact, even though it's just customer satisfaction. It's about making our customers happy. Yeah, well, sure, of course, but how much is it going to bring into the balance sheet? And then making sure that the actions that you identify or which are identified automatically from AI, like doable are them. And then if you correlate both of this information, they will give you very precise elements in your action plans where you can focus on.
Makes sense. All right, we're going to move swiftly on to tip number 4, which is all about building a strong foundation through reliability of data. So obviously it's the backbone of any CX plan. You mentioned about having customer context is very, very important. What are some of the maybe common data reliability issues that CX professionals may face?
There's a lot. We'll try to focus, guys. The first one is centralization. It's very important. If you just listen to support tickets, for example, and you just analyze this to build action plans, you are going to be at one touch point of the customer journey, which is the support phase, and therefore it's not going to represent everything, right? So you're going to have a black and white view of what's happening on the ground. So as much as possible, you want to centralize every single piece of customer feedback, and it doesn't have to be a survey answer. Again, it can be from the social networks based on your business. It can come from your Google reviews. It can come from your surveys, of course. It can come from internal meeting notes, for example. That's a very good one if you're more in the B2B side of the world. But you want to centralize a lot of this information. And this is very important for data reliability when it comes to action, because otherwise you might act based on action plans which are generating when you don't see the whole picture. So you need to have the whole picture. And then another one which I think is very interesting and very important in 2025 is you have to be careful with AI as well, because there is what we call hallucination. So if you ask ChatGPT to generate you an action plan for your business, if you don't give the right context, you're going to end up with something that looks very good, but that is just fully BS. Like it doesn't. Yeah, go for it.
99% sure if I typed in, give me an action plan for my business, and I just sent that to ChatGPT, it would send me.
Yeah, it will build you an action plan.
Yeah.
But so the difference between what you would get there and if you were to do it at a more professional way, a more scalable way, is you need to make sure that the users or people that are generating these action plans, they have the right context, so they have access to the right customer feedback, making sure that there is no hallucinations. So you are only using existing customer feedback to get these recommendations, so it doesn't hallucinate. And that's what we call in the AI world RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, which basically means it's going to only come, I mean, it doesn't just mean this, but from a CX standpoint, it will mean that the recommendation that you're going to get are going to be based very precisely on this customer feedback, and that you can also trace it back. You can also say, okay, well, if it was a sign issue in my shop, like I can know exactly how many people, and I can know exactly which customer feedback, whether they are coming from social networks or mere reputation or whatever, you can trace them back. So you have the full context. And then there is another one as well, Carlos, I think, on making sure that it's up to date. If you just, like build an action plan for something that happened like a couple of years ago or a couple of months ago, it might not be up to date. So you want to make sure that it's very much up to date.
Keep plans up to date. Yeah. I could have said it better. I mean, you mentioned you mentioned earlier today about, having action plans for 6 months and how that might not have the same relevance as today. I think that's a really important point, because when we think of doing plans, often in our mind, they can be quite stable. The idea is we plan for something, we execute it, and something like an action plan, because we're feeding in data that's often in real time, it's all our customer information, which is constantly evolving. It is very important that we look at it at a very regular frequency. Also, the yearly survey, which was the traditional method.
Yeah, exactly. If you were to do it a couple of years ago, you would do it once per year. And there are still a lot of organizations that do this, which let's run a yearly survey, let's build an action plan, and then let's do it. But, like we're in 2025, and your customers are going to give you feedback whether you like it or not, whether you ask for it or not, you're going to get it. So it's best to be a little bit more reactive, right? So you want to, again, you don't have to do it on a daily basis, but doing it on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, based on the size of your team, makes a lot of sense. And again, extremely hard if you don't have AI. You would have to have 20 consultants working for you and doing it for you like on a regular basis. It would cost a lot of money. Like right now, it's no longer the case.
Okay. So to wrap up into our final tip, we have assessing impact and effort through measuring return of investment of CX initiatives. This is, you've mentioned it a little bit earlier, and it's a really interesting topic because it's relatively new for companies, as you say, in 2025 to use action plans that are constantly changing. And you've also touched a little bit on measuring financial impact, so return of investment in this case. How can CX teams effectively determine their return on investment? How are they able to evaluate the effort that they're putting into it?
It's a very, very good tips, Carlos. It's very interesting because, again, like if you want to help your business, your team to transform, you can tell good stories and be like, yeah, well, that's what our customers are saying. We should do this. If you're a 20 people startup, it's very straightforward. If you are a 5,000 people company, it's a little bit harder, right? You got a lot of people to convince on the way. In businesses, when it comes to convincing people, ROI is a very good way to move forward faster. So if you want to transform your business, like linking what your customers are saying with return on investments, it will make your life a lot easier, right? And so there are a couple of ways to see it. When it comes to CX, we can discuss customer lifetime value, you can discuss churn, you can discuss the relationship with the risk of churn plus the cost of acquisition of a customer. When it comes to action plan, at the end of the day, you have to link how many people are affected by the action plan, how many customers, to their business value. So their customer lifetime value, which again, you will get in your CRM system most of the time. If I take, for example, I'm having, like a mobile application, and I know that one of my customer segments, they are having an issue to update the payment method in their journey. You can very precisely have how many people are affected by this, and therefore it's not going to be precise 100% except if everything is integrated, but you can just have an average customer lifetime value and just multiply it by the number of people which are affected. And if you do this, like, it will give you a rough idea, of where to focus on. Again, it doesn't have our point of view on this is it doesn't have to be as precise as your turnover. It doesn't have to be as precise as your NPS score. It has to give you a way to prioritize the return on investment and to get a global idea. So if you have like a list of 10 improvements or an action plan with 10 different points, like which are the ones which are going to drive the business forward? And so this is very important. And then getting back to what we've said a little bit earlier, you need to correlate this with the, like how hard is it to actually do it, And if you have both of this information working together, it is pretty straightforward to get the ROI because you know the effort it's going to take you and you know the financial impact. And therefore, it's a lot easier to convince people than just saying, hey, like we have a bunch of detractors here, we need to solve it. Well, if you don't know the financial impact, if you don't know what it's going to take from the different teams, because as a CX person, you are horizontal, right? You deal with a lot of departments, but at the end of the day, it's not you that's going to improve the product.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's helped answer a question that I've been wrestling with during this episode, which is how to balance quick wins against long-term strategies. And I think effectively, as you mentioned, being able to rank the return of investment of the different action plans alongside the effort kind of eliminates that issue entirely.
Yeah. And that's also where the job of customer experience makes a lot of sense. Being the guardian, like the person in the organization that has a global vision on this, and they can dispatch the right action plan to management, but also down to the different teams, and evaluating based on the available information what to focus on makes a lot of sense. And that's why it's a very exciting job, right? Even if you're doing it in a very large organization, like there's a lot to do, and you might not have the CX job title, you might be working in quality. It's just the same. You have to have that global vision, dispatch it to the right people, and make sure it drives the business forward and it transforms it faster.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, so to summarize, we have tip number 1, which is about defining the scope of your action plan. So what you want to do there is be as precise as possible. The more actionable, the better. Then we have tip 2, which is about identifying when and how to act based on the triggers. So timing is obviously very important here, and having specific triggers throughout the customer journey in order to effectively validate the plan. Then we have tip number 3, which is about prioritizing actions based on the right KPIs, the right level of customer segmentation. And here we're looking at context. So really digging into the customer context and using that to inform the action plans we create. Then we have tip number 4, which is about building a strong foundation based on reliability of data. So first things first, centralize your customer feedback, have it in one place so you can analyze that together. And then be a little bit wary of AI, because as you mentioned, there is possibility of AI hallucinations. So it's really important, again, to give the right context, as much information as possible that makes sense to your business. Then we have tip number 5, which is about assessing the impact and effort through ROI, return on investment. And that is obviously something that can be communicated to every single department across the company, which gives you buy-in, it gives you more power as a CX professional to make those changes. And also you can give a better ranking. So you can rank that information based on the effort and the cost saved potentially by linking the affected customers to their lifetime value.
Thanks, Carlos. Makes a lot of sense. Very good conversation.
Indeed. Thanks again for joining, and see you in the next one.
See you, Carlos. Bye.